An uninterrupted, now hidden, now open fight, a fight that each time ended either in a revolutionary reconstitution of society at large or in the common ruin of the contending classes. In the earlier epochs of history, we find almost everywhere a complicated arrangement of society into various orders, a manifold gradation of social rank. In ancient Rome, we have patricians, knights, plebeians, slaves. In the Middle Ages, feudal lords, vassals, guildmasters, journeymen, apprentices, serfs. In almost all of these classes, again, subordinate gradations. The modern bourgeois society that has sprouted from the ruins of feudal society has not done away with class antagonism, as it has established new forms of struggle in place of the old ones. Our epoch, the epoch of the bourgeoisie, possesses,
Where are you
however,
going?
this
I have to make
distinctive
sure.
feature.
Can't you be a little not a chick?
It has simplified the class antagonism. Society as a whole is more and more splitting up into two great hostile camps, into two great classes directly facing each other, bourgeoisie and proletariat. From the serfs of the Middle Ages sprang the chartered burghers of the earliest towns. From these burgesses, the first elements of the bourgeoisie were developed. The discovery of America, the rounding of the Cape, opened up fresh ground for the rising bourgeoisie. The East Indian and Chinese markets, the colonization of America, trade with the colonies, the increase in the means of exchange and in commodities generally, gave to commerce, navigation, to industry, an impulse never before known, and thereby to the revolutionary element in the tottering feudal society, a rapid development. The feudal system of industry, under which industrial now no longer sufficed for the growing wants of the economy. The manufacturing system took its place. The guildmasters were pushed on one side by the manufacturing middle class. Division of labor between the different corporate guilds vanished in the face of division of labor in each single workshop. Meantime, the markets never grow, the demand never rises. Even manufacturing sufficed. Thereupon, machinery revolutionized the place of manufacture was taken by the modern industry, the place of the industrial middle class, by industrial millionaires, the leaders of whole industrial armies, modern bourgeois. Modern industry has established the world market for which the discovery of America paved the way. This market has given an immense development to commerce, to navigation, to communication by land. This development has, in its time, reacted on the extension of industry. In proportion as industry, commerce, railways extended, in the same proportion the bourgeoisie developed, increased its capital, and pushed into the background every class handed down from the Middle Ages. We see, therefore, how the modern bourgeoisie is a course of development, of a series of revolutions in the modes of production and of exchange. Each step in the development of the bourgeoisie was accompanied by the political influence of that class. An oppressed under the sway of the feudal nobility, an armed and self-governing association of medieval times. Here in the urban republic, as in Italy and Germany, there tactical the monarchy. Manufacture proper, the absolute monarchy as a counterpoise against the nobility. Cornerstone of the great monarchies in general, the bourgeoisie has at last, since the establishment of modern industry and of the world market, conquered for itself, in the modern representative state, exclusive political sway. The executive of the modern state has set a committee for managing the common affairs of the whole bourgeoisie. The bourgeoisie historically has played a most revolutionary part. The bourgeoisie, wherever it has got the upper hand, has put an end to all feudal, patriarchal, idyllic relations. It is pitilessly torn asunder the motley feudal ties that bound man to his natural superiors, and has left remaining no other nexus between man and man than naked self-interest, callous payment. It has drowned the most heavenly ecstasies of religious fervor, of chivalrous enthusiasm, of Philistine sentimentalism, the icy water of egotistical calculation. It has resolved personal worth into value, and in place of the numberless and indefeasible chartered freedom, has set up that single, unconscionable freedom, free trade. One word for exploitation, veiled by religious and political illusions, naked, shameless, direct, brutal exploitation. The bourgeoisie has stripped of its halo every occupation hitherto honored and looked up to. It has converted the physician, the lawyer, the priest, the poet, the man of science into its paid wage laborers. The bourgeoisie has disclosed how it came to pass that the brutal display of liberty in the Middle Ages, which so much time, found its fitting complement in the most slothful indolence. It has been the first to show what man's activity it has accomplished wonders, far surpassing. It has selected a condition that put in the shade all forms of the bourgeoisie goodbye! Relations of whole relations conservation of old modes of production. Those who cross Brevin will die! First people for all distinguish the what the? With sober senses, his real conditions of life, and his relations with his
Really awesome! We made it!
The need of a constantly expanding market for its products chases the bourgeoisie over the whole surface of the globe. It must nestle everywhere, settle everywhere, establish connections. The bourgeoisie has, through its exploitation of the world market, given a cosmopolitan character to production and consumption in every country. To the great chagrin of the nationalists, it was drawn from under the feet of the national ground on the all old established national industries are destroyed, or are daily being destroyed. They are disloyal. Its introduction becomes a life and death question for all civilized nations, by industries that no longer work up indigenous raw material, but raw material drawn from the remotest industries whose products are consumed not only at home, but in every quarter of the globe. In place of the old wants, satisfied by the productions of the country, we find new wants. Old self-sufficiency, we have intercourse in every direction, universal interdependence material, but also in intellectual creation. The intellectual creations of national one-sidedness comprises a world literature. The bourgeoisie, by the rapid improvement of all instruments of production, by the immensely facilitated means of communication, draws all, even the most barbarian nations, into civilization. The devices of its economies are the heavy artillery that beats down all Chinese walls, which enforces the barbarians' intensely obstinate hatred of foreigners to capitulate. It compels all nations, by pain of extinction, to adopt the bourgeois mode of production. It compels them to introduce what it calls civilization into their midst, become bourgeois themselves. In one word, it creates a world after its own image. The bourgeoisie has subjected the country to the rule of the town. It has created enormous cities, has greatly increased the urban population compared with the rural, and has thus rescued a considerable part of the population from the idiocy of rural life. Just as it has made the country dependent on it, so it has made barbarian and semi-barbarian dependent on the civilized ones, the peasants on nations of business. Of property. It has agglomerated production and has concentrated property in a few hands. The natural consequence of this was political centralization. Independent, loosely connected provinces with separate interests, laws, governments, and systems of taxation lumped together into one nation with one government, one code of laws, one national class interest, one frontier and one customs tariff. The bourgeoisie, during its rule of scarce 100 years, has created more colossal productive forces than have all preceding generations together. Subjection of nature's forces to man, machinery, application of chemistry to industry and agriculture, steam navigation, railways, electric telegraphs, clearing of whole continents for cultivation, canalization of rivers, whole populations conjured out of the ground. What earlier century had even a presentiment of productive forces slumbered in the lap of social labor? We see then the means of production and of exchange, on whose foundation the bourgeoisie built itself up, were generated in feudal society. At a certain stage in the development of these means of production and of exchange, the conditions under which feudal society produced exchange, the feudal organization of agriculture and manufacturing industry, in one word, the feudal relations of production, became no longer compatible with the already developed incentives. They had to be first aside. They were first aside. Into their place stepped free competition, accompanied by a social and political constitution adapted to it, and by the economical and political sway of the bourgeois class. A similar movement.
You will face justice! Surrender!
That
Modern
chance,
bourgeois
Buster.
society would
So you have chosen death! How pathetic!
a society that has conjured up such gigantic means of production and of exchange. No longer able to control the powers of the netherworld, he is called up by his spells. For many a decade past, the history of industry and
Behold my true power!
forces, modern conditions of production, against the property relations that are the conditions for the existence of the bourgeoisie and of its rule. It is enough to mention that by the periodical return put on its card, each time the existence of the entire bourgeois society.
It's work!
These prices, great part, not only of the existing parts, also of the previously productive forces, are periodically destroyed. In these crises there breaks out an epidemic of all earlier times. What is been absurdity? Epidemics appears as if a famine
This
and
is far
universal
from
war
over!
devastation had cut off the supply of every
Feel
means
my
of
power!
subsistence. Industry and commerce seem to be destroyed. And why? Because there is too much civilization, too much means of subsistence, too much industry, too much commerce. The productive forces at the disposal of society no longer tend to further the development of the conditions of bourgeois property. On the contrary, they have become too powerful for these conditions, by which they are fettered, and so as soon as they overcome these fetters, they bring disorder into the whole of bourgeois society, endanger the existence of bourgeois property. Too narrow to comprise the wealth created by them. And how does the bourgeoisie get over these crises? On the one hand, productive forces, by the conquest of new markets, and by the more thorough exploitation of the old ones, paving the way for more extensive crises, and by diminishing the means whereby crises are prevented. The weapons with which the bourgeoisie felled feudalism are now turned against the bourgeoisie itself. But not only has the bourgeoisie forged the weapons that bring death to itself, it has also called into existence the men who are to wield these weapons, the modern working class, the proletarians. In proportion as the bourgeoisie, i.e., capital, is developed, in the same proportion is the proletariat, the modern working class, developed. A class of laborers who live only so long as they find work, and who find work only so long as their labor increases capital. These laborers, who must sell themselves are every other article of commerce, are consequently exposed to all the vicissitudes of all the fluctuations of the market. Owing to the extensive use of machinery and to division of labor, the work of the proletarians has lost all individual character, consequently, all charm for the workman. He becomes an appendage of the machine, and it is only the most simple, monotonous, and easily acquired knack that is required. The cost of production of a workman is restricted, almost entirely, to the means of subsistence that he requires for his maintenance and for the propagation of his race. But the price of a commodity, and therefore also of labor, is equal to its cost of production. In proportion, therefore, as the repulsiveness of the work increases, the wage decreases. Nay, more, in proportion as the use of machinery and division of labor increases, in the same proportion, the burden of toil increases, whether by prolongation of the working hours, by increase of the work exacted in a given time, or by increased speed of the machinery, etc. Modern industry has converted the little workshop of the patriarchal master into the great factory of the industrial capitalist. Masses of laborers, crowded into the factory, are organized like soldiers. As privates of the industrial army, they are placed under the command of a perfect hierarchy of officers and sergeants. Not only are they slaves of the bourgeois class and of the bourgeois state, they are daily and hourly enslaved by the machine, by the overlooker, and above all, by the individual bourgeois manufacturer himself. The more openly this despotism proclaims and aim, the more petty, the more hateful,
You betrayed the law!
bittering,
Freeze!
the less the skill and exertion of strength applied in manual labor and other things. The more modern industry becomes developed, the more is the labor of men who consider businesses of age and sex no longer any distinctive social validity for the working class. All more or less expensive to use according to the so far that he is set upon by the landlord, the shopkeeper, the lower strata of the middle class, all tradespeople, shopkeepers, tradesmen generally, all these sink gradually into the proletariat, partly because their dominion of capital does not suffice for the scale which modern industry is carried on. Thus, the proletariat is recruited from all classes of the population. Stages of development. With its birth begins its struggle with the bourgeoisie. First, the contact is carried on by individual laborers, then by the workpeople of a factory, then by the operatives of one trade in one locality against the individual bourgeois who directly exploits them. They direct their attacks not against the bourgeois conditions of production, but against the principles of production themselves. They destroy imported wares that compete with their labor. They smash to pieces machines. They set factories ablaze. They seek to restore by force the vanished status of the worker into the labor. At this stage, the laborers still form an incoherent mass.
I got you now!
Broken up their together they unite
I've had enough of your kung fu tricks!
fight their enemies. The enemies of their enemies are that strength more. The various instances and conditions of life within the ranks of the proletariat are more and more individualized in proportion as machinery obliterates all distinctions of labor. Nearly everywhere reduces wages to the same low level. The growing competition among the bourgeois and the resulting commercial crises make the wages of the workers ever more fluctuating. The unceasing improvement of machinery, ever more rapidly developing, makes their livelihood more and more complex. The collisions between individual workmen and individual bourgeois take more and more the character of collisions between equals. Thereupon the workers begin to form combinations, trade unions, against the bourgeois. They club together in order to keep up the rate of wages. They found permanent associations in order to make provision beforehand for these occasional revolts. Here and there the contest breaks out in riots. Now and then the workers are victorious, but only for a time. The real fruit of their battle is not in the immediate result, but in the This union is helped on by the improved means of communication that are created by modern industry and that place the workers in different localities in contact with one another. It was just this contact that was needed to centralize the numerous local struggles, all of the same character, into one national struggle between classes. But every class struggle is a political struggle, and that union, to attain which the burghers of the Middle Ages, with their miserable highways, required centuries, the modern proletariat, thanks to railways, this organization of the proletariat into a class, and consequently into a political, is continually being upset again by the competition between the workers themselves. But it ever rises up again, stronger, firmer, mightier. It compels legislative recognition of particular interests of the workers by taking advantage of the divisions among the bourgeoisie itself. Thus, the 10 hours bill in England was carried. together collisions between the classes of the old society further, in many ways, the course of development of bourgeoisie finds itself involved in a constant battle, at first with the aristocracy, later on with those portions of the bourgeoisie itself, whose interests have become antagonistic to the progress of industry, all times with the bourgeoisie formed. In all these battles, it sees itself as to appeal to the proletariat, to ask for its help, and thus to dominate the political arena. The bourgeoisie itself, therefore, supplies the proletariat with its own instruments of political and general education. It furnishes the proletariat with weapons combating the bourgeoisie. Further, the ruling classes are, by the advance of industry, precipitated into the proletariat, or are at least threatened in their new conditions of existence. These also supply the proletariat with fresh elements of enlightenment and progress. Finally, in times when the class struggle nears the decisive process of dissolution going on within the ruling class, in fact, within the whole range of society, a small section of the ruling class cuts itself adrift and joins the revolution. The class that holds the future, just as a section of the nobility went over to the bourgeoisie, then now a portion of the bourgeoisie goes over to the proletariat, and in particular, a portion of the bourgeois ideologists who have raised themselves to the level of comprehending theoretically the historical movement as a whole. Of all the classes that stand face to face with the proletariat alone is the real revolutionary class. The proletariat. They thus defend not their present, but their future. It is with their own standpoint that themselves the danger be swept into the movement of proletarian revolution. Its conditions of life, however, prepare it far more for the
Feel
part
my
of the broad
power!
pool of reactionary intrigue. In the conditions of the proletariat, those of old society at large are already
You're here to
virtually
ask for-
swamped. The proletarian is without property. His relation to his wife and children has no longer anything in common with the bourgeois family relations. Modern industrial labor, modern subjection to capital, the same in England as in France, in America as in Germany, has stripped him of any trace of national character. Law, morality, religion are to him so many bourgeois prejudices, which lurk in ambush just as many bourgeois interests. All the preceding classes that got the upper hand sought to fortify their already acquired status
Intrusion
by
detected.
protecting
Please remove
society's
yourself
laws
from the facility.
and appropriation. The proletarians cannot become masters of the productive forces of society, except by abolishing their own previous mode of appropriation, and thereby also every other previous mode of appropriation. They have nothing of it. Their mission is to destroy all previous securities for and insurances of individual property. All previous historical movements were movements of minorities, or the interests of minorities. The proletarian movement is the self-conscious, independent movement of the immense majority. in the interests of the immense majority. The proletariat, the lowest
Intrusion
section of our
detected.
present society,
Please remove yourself from the facility.
cannot raise itself up without the whole superintendent of official society being sprung into the earth, though not in substance, yet in form. The struggle of the proletariat with the bourgeoisie is at first a struggle. The proletariat of each country must, of course, first of all, settle matters of democracy. In depicting the most general phases of the development of the proletariat, we traced the more or less veiled civil war raging within the existing society up to the point where that war breaks out into open revolution, and where the violent overthrow of the bourgeoisie lays the foundation for the sway of the proletariat. Hitherto, every form of society has been based, as we have already seen, on the antagonism of oppressing and oppressed classes. But in order to oppress a class, certain conditions must be assured to it, under which slavish existence. The serf, in the period of serfdom, raised himself to membership in the commune, just as the bourgeoisie, under the yoke of feudal absolutism, managed to develop into a bourgeois. The modern laborer, on the contrary,
To unlock this door, stand on the blinking floor panel to your right.
deeper and deeper below the conditions of existence of his own class. He becomes a pauper, and pauperism develops
It
more
appears that you are lost.
population.
Would you like assistance?
Here it becomes evident that the bourgeoisie is unfit any longer to be the ruling class of society, and to encourage its conditions of existence in society. It is unfit to rule because it is existence to its slaves, because it cannot help letting him sink into such a state its existence is no longer compatible with society. The essential condition for the existence and for the sway of the bourgeois class is the formation and augmentation of capital. The condition for capital is wage labor. Wage labor rests exclusively on competition between the laborers. The advance of industry, whose involuntary promoter is the bourgeoisie, replaces the isolation of the laborers due to competition by their revolutionary competition due to association. The development of modern industry, therefore, cuts from under its feet the very foundation on which the bourgeoisie produces and perpetuates companies. What the bourgeoisie, therefore, produces is its own grave digging. Its fall and the victory of the proletariat are equally inevitable. End of section 1. Section 2 of Communist Manifesto. This David Box recording is in the public domain. The Communist Manifesto by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. Section 2. Proletarians and Communists. In what relation do the communists stand to the proletarians as a whole? The communists do not form a separate party opposed to other working class parties. They have no interests separate and apart from those of the proletariat as a whole. They do not set up any sectarian principles of their own by which to shape and mold the proletarian movement. The communists are distinguished from the other working class parties by this only. 1. In the national struggles of the proletarians of the different countries, they point out and bring to the front the common interests of the entire proletariat, independently of all nationality. 2. In the various stages of development which the struggle of the working class against the bourgeoisie has to pass through, they always and everywhere represent the interests of the movement as a whole. The communists, therefore, are on the one hand, practically, the most advanced and resolute section of the working class parties of
Please remain still during the incineration process. Thank you.
others. On the other hand, theoretically, they have over the great mass the proletariat the advantage of clearly understanding the rapid march, conditions, and the ultimate general results of the proletariat. The immediate aim of the communists was the same as that of all the other proletariat parties: the formation of the proletariat into a class, overthrow of the bourgeois supremacy, conquest of political power by the proletariat. The theoretical conclusions of the communists are in no way based on ideas or principles that have been invented or discovered by this or that would-be universal reformer. They merely express, in general terms, actual relations springing from an existing class struggle, from a historical movement going on under our very eyes. The abolition of existing property relations is not at all a distinctive feature of communism. All property relations in the past have continually been subject to historical
All right.
change.
While you're driving, I only have two rules. Aim and fly.
Abolish feudal property and abolition of bourgeois the modern bourgeois private property is defined as for the laborer? Not a bit. It creates capital, i.e., that kind of property which exploits wage labor, and which cannot increase except upon condition of getting a new supply of wage labor is based on the antagonism of capital and wage labor. Let us examine both sides. Is to have not only a purely personal, but a social status in production. Capital is a collective product, and only by the united action of many members, nay, in the last resort, only by the united action of all members of society, can it be set in motion. When, therefore, capital is converted into common property, into the property of all members of society, personal property is not thereby transformed into social property. It is only the social character of the property that is changed. It loses its class. Wage labor. The price of wage labor is the minimum wage. That quantum of the means absolutely requisite for the existence of the labor. Therefore, the wage laborer appropriated by means of his labor merely suffices existence. We by no means intend to abolish this appropriation of the product of labor. Appropriation that is made and that leaves no surplus wherewith to demand the laborer. All that we want to do is the physical character of this appropriation, under which the laborer lives merely to achieve profit. He is allowed to live only insofar as the interest of the ruling class requires. In bourgeois society, living labor is but a means to increase accumulated labor. In communist society, accumulated labor is but a means to widen and enrich, to promote the existence of the laborer. Therefore, the past dominates the present. The present dominates the past. In bourgeois society, capital happen is independent and has individuality, while the living person has no individuality. And the abolition of this state of things is taught by the bourgeois, abolition of individuality and freedom. Like so, the abolition of bourgeois individuality, bourgeois independence, and bourgeois freedom is undoubtedly freedom under the present bourgeois conditions of production, free trade, free selling, and buying. But if selling and buying free selling and buying also, just talk about selling and buying, all the other words freedom and if only in contrast to restricted selling and buying, with the best traders of the world. You are horrified at our intended but in your existing society, private property is already done away with for 9/10 of the population. Its existence for the few is solely due to its non-existence. You reproach us, therefore, with intending to do away with a form of property, the necessary condition for whose existence is the non-existence of any property for the majority of society. In one word, you reproach us with intending to do away with your property. Precisely so. That is just what you intend. From the moment when labor or rent, the social power capable of being from the moment when individual property can no longer be transformed into bourgeois property, into capital, from that moment, you say, individuality. You must therefore confess that by individual, you mean no other person than the bourgeois, than the middle class. This person must indeed be swept out of the way and made communism deprives no man of the power to appropriate the parts of society. All that it does is to deprive him of the power to subjugate the labor of others by means of such appropriation. It has been objected that upon the abolition of private property, all work will cease, and universal laziness will overtake us. According to this, bourgeois society has long ago gone to the dogs through sheer idleness. For those of its members who work, acquire nothing, and those who acquire anything do not work. All of this objection is but another expression of the tautology. There can no longer be any wage labor when there is no longer any capital. All objections urged against the communistic mode of producing have been urged against the communistic modes of producing disappearance of production itself. So the disappearance of class culture is to him identical with the disappearance of all culture. That culture, the loss of which he laments, is, for the enormous majority, mere training to act as a machine. But don't wrangle with us so long as you apply to our intended abolition of bourgeois property the standard of your bourgeois notions of freedom, culture, law, and science. Your very ideas are but the outgrowth of the conditions of your bourgeois production and bourgeois property, just as your jurisprudence is but the will of your class, according to a law for all, a will whose essential character is ratified your class. The selfish misconception that induces form into eternal laws of nature and of reason, relations that rise and disappear in the progress of production. This misconception what you admit in the case of legal property. You are, of course, forbidden with the bourgeois form of property. Abolition of the family. Even the most radical flare up at this infamous proposal of the communists. On what foundation is the present family, the bourgeois family, based? On capital, on private gain. In its completely developed form, this family exists only among the bourgeoisie.
It's such a shame that you chose the wrong side. Enjoy the last few minutes of your pathetic
And in
lives!
public prostitution. The bourgeois family will vanish, and of course, when it's properly vanished.
How about
Will vanish
this?
with the vanishing of capital. They charge us with wanting to stop the exploitation of children and parents. But destroy the most elegant religion and replace all education. Is not that also social and determined by the social conditions under which we live, by the intervention of direct or indirect of schools, etc.? The communists have not invented the intervention of society. They do this and rescue becomes all the more disgusting, normed by the actual violence. All family ties among the proletarians are torn asunder, and their children transformed into simple articles of commerce and instruments of labor. But you communists
What is this
the
nonsense?
community of women, screams the whole bourgeoisie. Sees in his wife their instrument of production. And naturally can come to no other conclusion than that the lot of being common to all will likewise fall to the women. He has not even a suspicion that the real point is to do away with the status of women as mere instruments of production. For the rest, nothing is more ridiculous than the virtuous elimination of our bourgeois.
How about this?
Openly established by the communists. The communists have no need to introduce a community of women, existing almost from time immemorial. The greatest pleasure is submitting each other's wives. Bourgeois marriage is in reality a system of wives in common, and thus, at the most, communists might possibly
Finished yet?
is that they desire to introduce, in substitution for hypocritically concealed and openly legalized
What is this nonsense?
public and private. The communists are further reproached for desiring to abolish countries and nationalities. We cannot take from them what they have not got. Since the proletariat must first of all acquire political supremacy, must rise to be the leading class, not in the bourgeois sense of the word. National differences and antagonisms between peoples are daily more and more vanishing, owing to the development of the bourgeoisie, to the world market, to uniformity in the mode of production and in the conditions of life corresponding thereto. The supremacy of the proletariat will cause them to vanish still faster. United action of the leading civilized countries at least is one of the first conditions for proletariat. In proportion as the
We have intruders on the ship. Mobilize!
The exploitation of one nation by another will also be put an end to. In proportion as the antagonism vanishes, the hostility of one nation to another will come to an end. The charges against communism made from a religious, philosophical, and generally ideological. Does it require deep intuition to comprehend man's ideas, views, and conceptions? In one word, man's changes with every change in the conditions of what else does the history of ideas prove? That intellectual production changes its character in proportion as material production has changed. The ruling ideas of each age have ever been the ideas of the ruling class. When people speak of ideas that revolutionize society, they do but express the fact that within the old society, elements of a new one have been created. Even faced with the dissolution of the old conditions of existence. When the ancient world was in its last world, religions were overcome by Christianity. When Christian ideas succumbed in the 18th century, feudal society fought with the revolutionary bourgeoisie. The ideas of religious liberty and freedom of conscience really gave the way of free competition within the domain of knowledge. Undoubtedly, it was said, religious, moral, philosophical, and judicial ideas have been modified in the course of historical development. Religion, morality, philosophy, political science, and law survive this change. There are that are common to all states of society. But communism abolishes eternal truth. It abolishes all religion, all morality, instead of constituting them on the basis. It therefore acts in contradiction to all past historical experience. What does this accusation reduce itself to? The history of all past society has consisted in the development of class antagonisms, and communism has different forms of consciousness. But whatever form they may have taken, one fact is common to all past. No wonder, then, that the social consciousness of past ages, despite all the multiplicity and variety it displays, moves within certain common forms, or general ideas, which cannot completely vanish except with the total disappearance of class antagonisms. The communist revolution is the most radical rupture with traditional property relations. No wonder that its development involves the most radical rupture with traditional ideas. What let us have done with the bourgeois ideas of communism? We have seen above that the first step in the revolution by the working class raised the proletariat of ruling as to win the battle of democracy. The proletariat would use its political supremacy to wrest, by degrees, all capital from the bourgeoisie, to centralize of the proletariat organized as the ruling class, and to increase the total of productive forces as rapidly as possible. Of course, in the beginning, this cannot be effected except by means of despotic inroads on the rights of citizens and on the conditions of business, which appear economically insufficient and untenable, but which, in the course of the movement, outstrip themselves, necessitate further inroads upon the old social order, and are unavoidable as a means of entirely revolutionary. These measures will, of course, be different in different countries. Nevertheless, in the most advanced countries, the following will be pretty generally applicable. 1. Abolition of property in land and application of all rents of land to public purposes. 2. A heavy progressive and graduated income tax. 3. Abolition of all right of inheritance. 4. Confiscation of the property of all immigrants and rebels. 5. Centralization of credit in the hands of the state by means of a national bank with state capital and an exclusive monopoly. 6. Centralization of the means of communication and transport.
You're forgetting something important about us.
7.
They
Extension of factories and instruments of production owned by the state. The building and cultivation of waste improvement of the soil generally in accordance with a common plan. 8. Equal liability of all to labor. Establishment of industrial armies, especially for agriculture. Combination of agriculture with manufacturing industries. Gradual abolition of the distinction in the country by a more equable distribution of the population over the country. 10. Free education for all children in public schools. Abolition of special labor in its present form. Abolition of education for industrial production, and etc. When, in the course of development, class distinctions have disappeared, and all production has been concentrated in the hands of a vast association of the whole nation, the public power will lose its political character. Political power, properly so called, is merely the organized power of one class organizing another. If the proletariat during its contest with the bourgeoisie is compelled, by the force of circumstances, to organize itself as a class, if, by means of a revolution, it makes itself the ruling class, sweeps away by force the old conditions of production, then it will, along with these conditions, have swept away the conditions for the existence of class antagonisms and of classes generally, and will thereby have abolished its own supremacy as a class. In place of the old bourgeois society, with its classes and class antagonisms, we shall have an association in which the free development of each is the condition for the free development of all. Communist Manifesto, Karl Marx, Socialist and Communist Literature. 1. Reactionary Socialism. A. Feudal Socialism. Owing to their historical position, it became the vocation of the aristocracies of France and England to write pamphlets against modern bourgeois society. In the French Revolution of July 1840, reform agitation, these aristocracies again succumbed to the hateful upstart. Thenceforth, a serious political contest was altogether out of the question. Literary battle alone remained possible. But even in the domain of literature, the old cries of the Restoration period become impossible. In order to arouse sympathy, the aristocracy were forced to lose sight of their own interests, and to formulate their indictment against the bourgeoisie in the interest of the exploited working class alone. Thus, the aristocracy took their and whispering in his ears sinister prophecies of coming catastrophe. In this way arose feudal socialism, half lamentation, half lampoon, half echo of the past, half menace of the future. At times, by its bitter, witty, and incisive criticism, striking the bourgeoisie to the very heart's core, but always ludicrous in its effect, through total incapacity to comprehend the march of modern history. In order to rally the people, waved the proletarian alms bag in front for a battle. But the people, so often as it joined them, saw on their hindquarters more evil coats of arms, and deserted with loud and irreverent laughter. One section of the French England exhibited respect, pointing out that their mode of exploitation was different to that of the bourgeoisie. Bikeless forget that they exploited under circumstances and conditions that were quite different, that are now antiquated. In showing that, under their rule, the modern proletariat never existed, they forget that the modern bourgeoisie is the necessary offspring of their own form of society. For the rest, so little do they conceal the reactionary character of their criticism that their chief accusation against the bourgeoisie amounts to this: that under the bourgeois regime a class is being developed which is destined to cut up root and branch the old order of society. What they upgrade the bourgeoisie with is not so much that it creates a proletariat, as that it creates a revolutionary proletariat. In political practice, therefore, they join in all coercive measures against the working class, and in ordinary life, despite their highfalutin phrases, they stoop to pick up the golden apples dropped from the tree of industry, and to barter truth, love, and honor for traffic in wool, beetroot sugar, and potato spirits. As the parson has ever gone hand in hand with the landlord, so has clerical socialism with feudal socialism. Nothing is easier than to give Christian asceticism a socialist spin. Has not Christianity claimed against private property, against marriage, has it not preached in the place of duty, charity and poverty, celibacy and mortification of the flesh, monastic life and Mother Church? Christian socialism is but the holy water with which the priest consecrates the heart virtues of the aristocrat. B. Petty bourgeois socialism. The feudal aristocracy was not the only class that was ruled by the bourgeoisie, nor the only class whose conditions of existence pined and perished in the atmosphere of
You've gotta
modern
be
bourgeois
kidding me.
society. The medieval burgesses and the
That's
small
it.
peasant proprietors were the precursors of the modern bourgeoisie. In those countries which are but little developed, industrially and commercially, these two classes still vegetate side by side with the rising bourgeoisie. In countries where modern civilization has become fully developed, a new class of petty bourgeois has been formed, fluctuating between proletariat and bourgeoisie and ever renewing itself as a supplementary part of bourgeois society. The individual members of this class, however, are being constantly hurled down into the proletariat by the action of competition. And, as modern industry develops, they even see the moment approaching when they will completely disappear as an independent section of modern society, to be replaced, in manufactures, agriculture, and commerce, by overlookers, bailiffs, and shopkeepers. In countries like France, where the peasants constitute far more than half of the population, it was natural that writers decided that the proletariat against the bourgeoisie should use, in their criticism of the bourgeois regime, the standard of the peasant and petty bourgeois. Intermediate classes should take up the cudgels for the working class. Thus arose petty bourgeois socialism. Sismondi was the head of the school, not only in France, but also in Europe. This school of socialism discerned with great acuteness the contradictions in the conditions of modern production. The hypocritical apologies of economists. It proved incontrovertibly the disastrous effects of machinery and division of labor, concentration of capital and land in a few hands, overproduction and crises. It pointed out the inevitable ruin of the petty bourgeois and peasant, the misery of the proletariat, the anarchy of production, the crime, inequalities, and the distribution of wealth, the industrial war of extermination between nations, dissolution of old moral bonds, old family relations, of the old nationalities. In its positive aims, however, this form of socialism aspires either to restoring the old means of production and exchange, and with them the old property relations and the old society, or to cramping the modern means of
But
production
you
and of exchange within the framework of the old property relations that have been and will continue to be exploited by old means. In this case, it is both reactionary and utopian. Its last words are, when stubborn historical facts dispersed all participating effects of deception, this form of socialism C. Or true socialism. The socialist and communist literature of France, a literature that originated under the pressure of bourgeoisie, the struggle against was introduced into Germany at a time when it was largely German philosophers would be only forgetting that when he was writing French social conditions had not. The demands of the First French Revolution were nothing more than the demands of practical reason in general, and the utterance of the will of the revolutionary French bourgeoisie signified at all times the pure will, a will taken down to of true human will generally. The world of the German literate consisted solely in bringing new French ideas into harmony with philosophical conscience, or rather, in annexing the French ideas without deserting their own philosophic point of view. This annexation took place in the same way, namely by translation. It is well known how the monks wrote silly lives of Catholic saints over the manuscripts on which the classical works of ancient heathendom had been written. The German literate reversed this process with the profane French literature. They wrote their philosophical nonsense beneath the French original. For instance, beneath the French criticism of the economic functions of money, they wrote alienation of humanity. And beneath the French criticism of the bourgeois state, they wrote dethronement of the category of the general, and so forth. The introduction of these philosophical phrases at the back of the French historical criticisms they dubbed philosophy of action, true socialism, German science of socialism, philosophical foundation of socialism, and so on. The French socialist and communist literature was thus completely emasculated. And since it seized in the hands of the German to express the struggle of one class with the other, he felt conscious of having overcome French one-sidedness and of representing not true requirements, but the requirements of truth. Not the interests of the proletariat, but the interests of human nature, of man in general, who belongs to no class